The former First Minister died yesterday, still believing that Scotland could one day be independent. Maybe he's not the only one. Keir Starmer took his team to Edinburgh on Friday, but he somehow forgot his chief advisor on devolution, Sue Gray. Meanwhile, the Tories are inching towards a new leader. The favourites out of the running. Who's left? Neither of them, actually. Tomorrow, the government's holding its much-vaunted International Investment Summit that got into trouble before it even started over a port investment row. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds joins us as he unveils a new industrial strategy, though it feels like Labour is struggling to stay on message once again. We'll speak to the Scottish First Minister about the life and achievements of his predecessor, Alex Salmond, and ask about the cause that he so boldly championed, independence. John Swinney will join us live. The Conservatives think the government's in trouble after just 100 days in power. But they still haven't appointed a new leader, and the party seems to be shifting rightwards with two candidates left in the contest. We'll speak to Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride. We've all watched the horror of what's happened in the Middle East over the last 12 months. I'll speak to the author and historian Simon Sebag Montefiore to try to understand why and what may come next. Plus, with us throughout the show, columnist and former Number 10 speechwriter Philip Collins, former Number 10 Communications Director Guto Harry, and Financial Times columnist Miranda Green. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. By his own admission, Alex Salmond was no saint. A formidable interviewee and a clever debater, if you came up against him, and I did several times, you always risked a blast of withering scorn. As a matter of fact, he was due to be on this programme next Sunday. We were bracing ourselves for a tough one. But he was more than a great performer. He was one of the most consequential political figures of the last 30 years, leading the SNP from the margins to the mainstream of Scottish politics, and almost pulling off his great ambition of independence in 2014. His influence will long outlive him. Salmond was equally adept whether in office or in opposition. Right now, his Westminster rivals could learn a thing or two by studying his career. 101 days in, both government and opposition look pretty uncomfortable in their new clothes. Oppositions always struggle for attention, and when they do get it, it's often for all the wrong reasons. Thus far, the Conservative leadership contest simply seems to be reminding the electorate why the party lost power. Governments, on the other hand, always want us to pay less attention to some of their doings. In Labour's case, it's wardrobe, it's free tickets, it's wealthy donors, and it's withdrawal of winter fuel payments. But as Sir Keir's team is rapidly learning, when you're in charge, you don't get to pick and choose what the electorate wants to know about. It's called accountability. Let's start this morning with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to the Business and Trade Secretary. Jonathan Reynolds, your reflections on the passing of Alex Salmond?
Yeah, very sad news. I mean, an incredibly big figure in Scottish and UK politics, a formidable campaigner to be on the other side from. As a unionist, I could recognise in him, even though we had a different point of view, a passion for Scotland that underpinned everything he did. So very sad and thinking about his family.
Let's move on, if we may, to the bigness of this coming week, the investment summit. Can I just get one thing clear? Is the investment in London Gateway Port facility by the so-called rogue operator DP World on or is it off?
It is going ahead, and they're attending the summit. I mean, first of all, let me say I am so excited by this. I'm so excited by the transformation in the UK's investability that the change of government has brought about. Real, deep-seated policy and wider reasons underpin the platform that we can then go to the rest of the world around. But specifically with DP World, let me say, look, what happened with Penal Ferries was wrong. We believed it was wrong. The government at the time, the Conservative government, believed it was wrong. But the problem was it was legal. So we are changing that situation, and where a company can operate within that framework, we can work with them going forward.
Did you agree with your colleague Louise Haigh that a Labour government should boycott P&O?
Well, that's not the government's position.
No, but did you agree when she said it?
Oh, it isn't the government's position, Trevor. And what I would say, though, is that we, both my department and Louise and the Department of Transport, have worked very closely together. The employment bill, which my department sponsors, is a mechanism by which we can make sure that a P&O Ferry situation doesn't happen again. So we work very closely together. And as I say, we're changing the law. Where a company works within that, accepts that, we can talk to them about investments going forward.
But the politics of this is that she's a minister now. You're not campaigners anymore. And she basically undermined you, didn't she? Has she apologised yet?
Look, I don't see it that way. That's not the policy of the government. The investment's going ahead. DP World are attending the summit, which is going to be a tremendous event. And also, I'd say, you know, I work very closely with Louise on a whole range of really key policy areas that underpin investment. So she's part of the team that's delivered this success.
OK, you've got to defend your colleague. But tell me honestly, if you can, how close did we come to losing this £1 billion investment?
Look, we've had to have a conversation following some of the press reports. But, you know, look, as I say...
It could have gone, couldn't it?
They're attending. It's going ahead. But it's
could
part
have
of
gone, couldn't it? This is pretty awkward.
Look, it's part of a set of investments that are truly eye-catching, that are truly underpinned by the fact that the UK now has a political stability it didn't have before the election. It's got a government outwardly looking to the world, an internationalist government, not picking fights with the European Union for domestic political reasons. It's a government shaping markets, removing barriers to investment. Those are the big things.
But the point here is that this has taught you a lesson, hasn't it? That you cannot behave in government in the way you behaved in opposition.
I don't think anyone in the new government needs that lesson. We understand the responsibility that we have.
Well, Louise Haigh obviously does.
Well, look, all I'll say is we have got now a summit going ahead with an incredible set of investments, things that will make everyone optimistic and see the future of this country is incredibly exciting and bright. And it's a team that delivers that. It's not just my department.
OK, I'm not just asking you this to be annoying, though obviously there's pleasure in that. I want to ask you about a specific thing. Why didn't you invite Elon Musk? You're desperate to get a company which sacks its employees by Zoom, but you're stiffy about the biggest car maker in the world because he put something on social media you didn't like.
Look, I'm not going to comment on particular invitations from particular personnel.
Come on, but Elon Musk is not some odd invitation. It is Elon Musk, biggest car maker in the world, richest man in the world. Why didn't you invite him?
Look, I'm not going to comment on the reasons for any specific person, but I can tell you we have 300 of the most significant investors, business figures, people who can bring significant amounts of capital to the UK. Big names, things that will make a big difference to working people's lives. And that's the criteria.
You're happy to talk to me about DP World, who sacks their workers. You're happy to invite the Saudis, who authorise the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and they get the red carpet. Why isn't Musk being invited?
Well, I'm not going to comment.
This is you in opposition,
people.
Isn't it, again?
No, not at all. This is about who can bring the kind of investments that will make the biggest difference to the UK, to working people's lives. The fact that we have, I think, in 100 days...
Musk hasn't got a bob or two that he could put in a car into Britain.
Well, look, the criteria and the selection, this is a summit. I know that everyone wants to come. I do understand that. Not everyone can come, and I'm not going to... I think it would be right to go through the individual decisions for individual people, but this is about what will make the biggest difference.
Look, you understand how weird this sounds. You want people to come and invest in Britain. You want people to bring their money. Yet the one person who probably has got more money to burn and would probably like to invest in Britain, in fact, he says so publicly when he didn't get the invitation, you're deciding he's not good enough. For what reason?
No, look, if people have an investment proposition for the UK, of course, I will talk to them about it. I'm not going to go through... Look, thousands of people, Trevor, wanted to come to this summit.
Come on.
Of course they did.
Elon Musk is not thousands of people.
Well, look, I'll simply say that the people coming, you'll see the scale of the investments, you'll see the opportunities for the UK,
Okay.
You'll see the kind of quality and depth of the engagement this new government has. And I think to individually talk about a certain person here or there, look, that's not right on them, let alone the government.
All right. 2 days ago, you had the first meeting of Council of Nations Regions. Prime Minister's former chief of staff, now envoy to nation regions, wasn't there. Did you miss her?
Look, I'm a little bit old-fashioned on this, Trevor. I don't think it's right to talk about members of staff who haven't got the ability to come on the media themselves.
I'm not asking you to talk about it. I'm just asking you whether you missed the fact that she was there, whether it was important or not.
Look, all I'll say is I think when I have worked with Sue Gray on a number of issues, I found her absolutely professional, a huge asset, a huge assistance. She's had a change of role in Downing Street. I think, look, for me, the big things that affect governments are things this week like the Employment Rights Bill, protecting workers in the workplace, the investment summit, bring billions of pounds to the UK. I know the personnel and the personalities have a certain level of interest, but what governments are judged on, surely, is do they deliver on their promises? And this is a government doing that.
OK, well, let's talk about promises you made and big things. And one big thing, in fact, your big thing, is industrial strategy. You set up this Industrial Strategy Advisory Council, which we're told will be focusing on 8 growth-driving sectors. How much money has it got? And can you give me one concrete example of how it's going to create growth in one of these 8 sectors, financial services or creative industries? Take your pick.
Look, well, first of all, countries need an industrial strategy. They need to focus on the sectors that will make the biggest contribution to growth. If you actually look at UK history, the last 35 years, it's been financial and professional services, advanced manufacturing, ICT, responsible, Trevor, for over half of the country's growth. So the point about this is it's not the only areas the government cares about, but there are certain sectors that need particular attention. And they are about working across government to make sure the policy environment is right, working with business in a way that hasn't been the case to date. And the key differences are this will be cross-government, it will have longevity, it will deliver the kinds of changes, whether that is on energy policy, whether it's on visas, whether it's on regulation, access to finance, that make a difference. But you develop that with the business community themselves.
I hear the words. Where's the money? Well, how much money has this thing got to invest?
You are, I think, tempting me to preempt part of the budget spending review process. But I want to say one particular thing.
The Industrial Strategy Advisory Council will have money to spend?
Let me just say one particular thing on this. One thing that is different when people compare the UK to, say, the US is a disproportionate amount of our support for what we would call industrial policy comes from the tax system. So it's not just about pots of money, it's about what is the overall quantum of support. We will never match the spending of the US on the Inflation Reduction Act, but we can work across government, make policy better in a whole range of areas to attract the kinds of investments which we're going to see some of in this investment summit on Monday.
I'm reading into that answer that, OK, you're not going to spend Biden kind of money, trillions, but, hundreds of billions, I beg your pardon. Is this thing going to have any money? But what I'm hearing is it will have no money. What it'll have is it'll be a sort of ginger group.
Well, absolutely not. It's integral to the growth mission, but I would caution you against judging a policy like this in terms of what's the kind of announcement in terms of the pot of money. If you think about advanced manufacturing, the biggest issue is our energy prices are uncompetitive compared to our peers. So that's the kind of change that needs to happen. For other sectors, it will be about how fast is the regulatory regime getting new products to market. So don't just think of it about comparing country to country and spending pots. Consider the overall policy approach that has to get better.
Just hearing what you just said, is it going to be able to bring down energy prices?
Well, you have to wait for the individual announcements, Trevor. You know, part of this is building with business long-term
You just talked about it. I didn't.
I'm talking about the kind of areas. I'm talking about the kind of ways in which we make sure we are competitive, where we've got great strengths in life sciences or professional services. How are we keeping that advantage? How are we getting more of that investment? But let's be frank, we have lost out too many times to a country like France through their Choose France policy. It's time to stop losing it. It's time to stop winning.
Let's talk about something very, very concrete then. The chair of the body says that it's going to provide clear and strong single voice for business, nations and regions and trade unions. Here's what the most significant trade union leader in this area says about a specific thing. Sharon Graham of Unite says, what is happening in Grangemouth is an act of industrial vandalism with the loss of hundreds of jobs. The fiscal rules need to be changed so that we can invest in British industry. We need real money allocated in areas like Grangemouth. Let's say that your new council agrees with Sharon Graham. Does she get her way?
Look, it's about wiring the voice of that Industrial Strategy Council
No,
into
never
those
mind the
government
voice.
decisions.
If it says you should actually keep Grangemouth open, you should invest in jobs in the way the Unite wants. Will you do it?
Well, it's about working with business. I'm not going to give you a specific decision before that body has even met, and you know that. But what I'd say, first of all, Grangemouth is led by the Energy Department. It's a huge area of priority. They're working with the Scottish Government for the first time collaboratively around that. You will have seen already on things like the steel industry in Port Talbot, we are a government committed to co-investing with the private sector to bring about a fundamentally different approach to that. So let's not say it's the same as under the previous Conservative government.
No.
On the fiscal rules, could I just say, on the fiscal rules, they have changed.
OK, I'll have one more go then. Is it conceivable that the fiscal rules that you have advocated until now might be on the table for some kind of tweaking, some kind of loosening? Now, you've seen what's in the books and the £22 billion black hole. Is that possible?
Well, you know you're going to have to wait a few days till the budget.
I'm just asking you if it's possible, because quite often you rule things out.
Well, I think what you are
you ruling that out?
Is the fact that the fiscal rules have changed. The first rule has changed to allow a greater priority for long-term capital investment. It will stop what we saw under the previous government, whereas your capital budgets are being raided to pay for revenue spending. That is a significant change from the Chancellor. And look, I'd just say, on the wider picture, you cannot have the kind of prosperity that I'm excited about, that we're talking about now, without responsibility, without seriousness, that was lacking before the election. And that priority of a long-term investment is absolutely the right thing to do.
Let me ask you about something that is serious, which business bosses are asking about. You said that there will be no national insurance rise. Does that mean that employers' contributions to national insurance will not rise or not? You can't say wait for this, because actually you've been clear about one bit of this. Be clear about this. Will employers face the same level of national insurance that they do now in the future?
You know that budget is going to be announced to Parliament, and you know I'm not going to
I'm not asking about the budget.
the details.
I'm just asking you.
You know that you are. But look, we have very clear manifesto pledges on taxation, and the Chancellor has also been clear.
But it's not
this
clear.
Will be a budget for growth. Well,
but it's not clear.
You don't do a budget day by day. You know that's not how things are done in the UK. We have to wait for the budget.
I'm not asking about the budget. You're not clear. You made a pledge, no rise in national insurance. I'm asking you, does that apply to both employees' NI and employers' NI?
You know that pledge was taxes on working people, so it was specifically in the manifesto a reference to employees and to income tax and a whole range of commitments, including, by the way, we also had a commitment on corporation tax. So there's a lot already in the manifesto, but you have to wait for the detail of a budget, and you know that. The point is, this will be a budget for growth. The Chancellor has been absolutely clear on that, and the stability that is necessary and the responsibility will be wide into that.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but the reason I'm interested in this is, here's what somebody said about the whole issue of the national insurance. It's a tax on jobs for employers at the worst possible time. Labour will back business to keep British firms. You know who that is. So what you're saying is that's still possible, that there'll be a tax on jobs.
What I'm saying is Labour will back businesses to keep British firms competitive.
And
across the board, there will be an increase in the investability of the business environment.
Why can't you just say that actually it means employees and employers?
Because the Chancellor is giving a budget in a short period of time, and you know I'm going to respect that, and she's going to do that in the usual way.
OK.
And I don't think anyone could.
This is still open.
I don't think anyone could be clearer about how committed this government is to investment, to growth. You will see in the investment summit tomorrow sums of money, things that have been transformed, the business environment transformed by the change.
I understand. Look, the reason that I'm harroting you about all of these things is that businesses want clarity. They want stability. And if I'm to be straight with you, the evidence is that they don't think you are giving them. Let me show you something. The Institute of Directors tracks economic confidence amongst businesses. Here's what they said last week. What they think their likelihood of investment over the next 12 months. That red drop is you. And this is the consequence of, to be honest, a conversation we've just been having in which when I ask you, are you going to do this, you're going to do that, you tell me, don't know.
No.
That's the consequence.
Let me be clear. That is a consequence of the fact that as we walked into office, there were a whole range of things that had not been budgeted for.
You can't put this on the Tories. This is them.
Absolutely.
This is you.
If you put to public sector pay bodies, a process to set public sector pay, and you hide that in a desk and you don't reveal that to the public, that is negligent from the previous government. We've got to clear that up. When you've got things, flagship education policies, that you didn't fund from the previous government. So that reflects, yes, the situation, as the IFS said, is an unenviable one. We've got to clear it up, but we're going to clear it up in a way which has that platform for growth, prosperity, jobs, better times for everyone across the UK.
Just a quick last question. You are negotiating, or in the process of negotiating, a free trade agreement with Israel. Would you consider holding back on an agreement in order to influence Israeli behaviour in Lebanon and Gaza?
Well, we don't conduct foreign policy through free trade agreement negotiations. I do think there is a wider point that's right to say, which is the process of closer economic relationships with a whole range of countries is in itself a good thing. That's a sound basis for good relations, for peace and prosperity. But we wouldn't use the free trade agreement as a leverage of a foreign policy tool in that regard. That's about the diplomatic side of government, and the de-escalation that we're seeking, the two-state solution ultimately that we're seeking, is an integral part of that. But I wouldn't specifically...
So you wouldn't use trade weapons to influence
Not in that way, no. I think trade policy has more than an economic impact, but we wouldn't use it as a specific tool in that way.
Jonathan Reynolds, thank you very much for your time this morning. Let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by columnist and former Number 10 speechwriter Phil Collins, former Number 10 Communications Director Guto Harry, and Financial Times columnist Miranda Green. I think I heard from that fiscal rules are on the way to change, and I think it came as close as I've heard to admitting that they are going to do something on employers' tax. Guto, did you hear the same thing?
Certainly, yeah. Fiscal rules, yes, but I'll let others sort of get into that. But a tax, essentially, on employing people, that's what sort of levying NI at a higher level on employers is. And yes, they're absolutely going to do that. So nobody's happier than me to see a new government talk about growth as a priority and invite wealth creators to the UK, though with some notable exceptions, as you pointed out. But then they've got to reconcile that with the reality of the policies they're putting in place. That if you hire someone from day one, when you don't even know them, they have rights now that mean they can just disappear, and the burden is on you. That's great if you're a huge company. For a little one, it's not. And from day one, you are going to be paying a heftier slice of national insurance to take them on. That is not conducive to growth, and certainly not to employment.
It's kind of tricky, isn't it, Miranda, this employers' NI? They've got to fill the hole, and they've actually basically blocked off virtually every avenue except this. Yeah,
there are kind of no easy answers to any of the sort of difficult positions that the UK economy finds itself in. So, you know, unfortunately, this weird period of slight political vacuum in the run-up to this high-stakes budget means everybody picking over which of the slightly unfortunate choices Rachel Reeves might make. And you know, as Guto said, there is a real downside to making it more expensive to grow your workforce. But on the other hand, if you're going to ask for a historic boost in investment, you've got to have public investment as well as private investment. That's the only way you can tempt it in, and you've got to fund that, right? So there aren't really any easy options. I think the one thing on which there's quite a bit of consensus, though, is adjusting the fiscal rules and making that time period maybe from 5 to 10 years, for example, trying to make it easier to argue that investment can be a wider category of things, not just physical infrastructure. There are things there that they can do which I hope people will get behind. I mean, you know, on the taxation, it's very difficult because you've got to walk this line between saying those with the broadest shoulders should pay more and not scaring people away and sending them to invest in other countries. And they're very, very hyper-aware of having to walk that line. And actually, Michael Bloomberg, I think, who is coming to the summit, even if Musk is not, you know, he said yesterday publicly, look, you know, if you're worried that much about a little bit of more taxation, you don't really have a viable business. So there's also there's a sober decision for businesses to make as well as to whether this is actually destroying your confidence in the UK, which is newly stable, right?
Phil, you've been here before, haven't you, where these kind of nice judgments have to be made. How do you think they're handling it?
Well, I have to say that when I was involved in a government, the economic backdrop was so much more hospitable that it wasn't really comparable. So I think a certain amount of Understanding is required because, as Miranda says, you can pick holes in any given tax. There's no tax that everyone would say, hallelujah, thank God they've raised that one. That's a great idea. So it's easy to do that. I think the inheritance they've got is very difficult and it's very hard. And that's why I think the loosening of the fiscal rules will do most of the work. Because, as you said, they have blocked off so many avenues, partly because people like Guto will go on the telly and say, well, that's awful. Why have you done that?
It's all Guto Harry's fault.
Well, it mostly is. Well, in a sense, it mostly is, of course. But we'll come back to that.
Fundamental misunderstanding of big business can handle all kinds of burdens, but growth is driven by small employers. And I don't think there's anyone around the table who knows what it's like to think, can I afford to take on another 2 or 3 people and give them rights from day one?
OK, I love the way that... But you've rather jumped the gun. A whole series of a package of workers' rights which have gone out to consultation and will go into the long grass forever. You've brought it forward and you've enacted it immediately.
Well, that's even more cynical. If there's no intention of doing this...
Let's just stick with the employers' tax and what Jonathan Reynolds described as a tax on employers. They don't really have much choice, it looks like.
I don't see where else they're going to get the money from. I obviously there is a tension between tax on employers and all of the rhetoric that will come out of the investment summit. Obviously there is, and they're very well aware of that. But what else are they going to do? As you say, for political reasons in the election, they ruled out all sorts of other taxes. There is a deficit, there is a hole. We are spending an awful lot on servicing that debt. In the absence of growth, they've got to make some unpleasant decisions.
Miranda, I don't want to go on about it, except that I do. Right. I'm a bit baffled by this whole Musk thing. It just feels to me a bit odd that he literally doesn't get an invitation when all sorts of people, frankly, you wouldn't want to have tea with, do.
I'm really interested that you might want to have tea with Elon Musk, because I have to say I'm not sure I would.
Wouldn't you? It'd be fascinating.
Yeah, maybe. Well, journalistically I would.
Exactly.
But if I was actually the business secretary, I'm not sure how much use it would be to me, to be perfectly honest.
Really?
And actually, if you look at some of the...
Invite him for breakfast.
Yeah.
Invite him here for breakfast.
But
man's got 100 billion sitting about.
OK, but so they suffered some bad headlines, to be cynical about it, right? They suffered some bad headlines at the beginning for him not being on the list. But actually, how many headlines would have been dominated by Elon Musk this weekend and the next few days if he had been invited to London and he'd arrived and been tweeting about what a hopeless, case he thought the UK actually was? So I actually think it was probably a very sensible decision in terms of what they want to get out of the next few days. And also, the guy is a loose cannon, Trevor, right? So even in your studio, he might cause a mess.
OK, this is interesting that Elon Musk would suck the oxygen out of...
Well, there's obviously a case that he would have done, that he'd dominate things, that all of the journalistic attention would go to him. There's a case for saying that actually we don't want that. This is a serious proposition. And I think that it may well be that tomorrow the actual summit itself and the aftermath might change this story quite considerably. I don't just mean Elon Musk, but the very notion of the government having a sense of drive may well shift tomorrow.
Guto, there is an issue here, or there's a feeling here. The Louise Haigh thing felt like a moment where the government's got to decide whether it is the government or whether it's just still the opposition in its behaviour.
Yeah, exactly right. I've got a lot of sympathy for her saying what her heart tells her, that this is a company that has done things that she finds pretty repulsive. And there's a case to be made for saying, we will struggle to overlook what happened not that long ago with this company, but as Jonathan Reynolds tried to say this morning, the law will now sort of forbid that. But what you can't say is that the Transport Secretary does not speak for the government on an issue clearly to do with transport. That is just a ludicrous place to be in. You're basically saying she's in the cabinet, she's nominally in charge of transport, but just ignore what she says about P&O. That is a ridiculous place to be, and they've got to start sort of cleaning up that kind of stuff.
Quickly, Miranda, is she safe?
Well, she's probably quite irritated, wouldn't you say? Because her words are literally the words, not just of her cabinet colleagues, but also of the previous government about P&O. And all of a sudden, she's been sort of cut loose. It's not a very elegant way to behave this close to coming into power.
Well, we're going to come back and talk about the way the government's handling itself and its presentation a bit later. But it is now 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Business Secretary has told this programme that a £1 billion investment by DP World will go ahead. But he had to have a conversation with the company after a row over comments by the Transport Secretary, Louise Hay. Jonathan Reynolds said that the government's pledge on not raising national insurance contributions applied to working people, but he did not rule out raising employers' contributions. Well, there's a lot more to come this morning. In a moment, we'll be joined live by Scotland's First Minister, John Swinney. Then, a little later, following a crunch week in the Tory leadership race, we'll hear from their shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Mel Stride. And after another week of red-hot tensions in the Middle East, we'll ask the historian Simon Sebag Montefiore just how momentous a point we are at in the region's long and winding history. Well, this morning we are, of course, reflecting on the life of Alex Salmond, the former First Minister and SNP leader who died yesterday. I can speak now to the First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney. Good morning, First Minister. I wonder if we might start with your reflections on your predecessor, Alex Salmond.
This is a very sad day, and I want to begin by expressing my condolences to Alex's wife Moira and to his family. Alec made a colossal contribution to Scottish politics. He took the Scottish National Party from the fringes of Scottish politics to becoming the government of Scotland, and he also took Scotland incredibly close to becoming an independent country in the referendum in 2014. So I think it's been universally acknowledged that politically Alex Salmond had a huge impact on our public life within Scotland and the United Kingdom, and I pay tribute to that this morning.
You spend a lot of time, as it were, working next to him. Can you talk about his force of personality? What was it that gave him that level of dominance in Scottish politics?
I think there were two elements. First was a sense of absolute determination to succeed in his politics. So there was a bring people together and to make sure that we were successful in our politics. So there was real drive and energy right at the heart of it. And the second thing was, I think, his sense of strategic perspective was important in identifying how you went from one situation to another and how you built up through those strategic decisions the case for Scottish independence or the case for effective government within Scotland, which is what we have delivered and demonstrated. So it was that combination of real drive and strategic thinking which was at the heart of the success that Alex Salmond delivered.
His successor, Nicola Sturgeon, in her tribute, referred to the fact that essentially they had fallen out. But this was a broader issue than just the two of them, wasn't it? That the SNP hierarchy essentially cut off Alex Salmond. This was before any of the personal allegations came up. Do you, in any way, feel regretful now about the way that he says he was treated?
Well, after Alex stood down as First Minister, of course, he then opted to return to the House of Commons and was successfully elected to the House of Commons in 2015 and played his part there. And obviously we had a very difficult election in 2017, and to his horror and to the horror of the rest of us, Alec lost his parliamentary seat in 2017. So there was, of course, a difficult period, and there'll be time to reflect on all of that. But I think what's important at this moment is to acknowledge that Alex Salmond was a hugely important and significant and influential figure in Scottish and United Kingdom politics, and he changed our politics and made the whole concept and the possibility of independence a real prospect for so many individuals within Scotland, and got us so close to the achievement of independence in 2014. And our job now is to build on those foundations, because what we see in politics in Scotland today is still just as much support and enthusiasm for independence as there was in the referendum in 2014. So that debate has got to come to its conclusion, and we will make sure that it does.
Well, let's talk about the relationship between Holyrood and Westminster. You attended the new Nations and Regions Council on Friday. I understand that you have said that you, as First Minister, will only talk to the Prime Minister directly. Where does that leave the Prime Minister's so-called envoy, Sue Gray?
I think it's important to know what happened on Friday at the event in Edinburgh. The morning started for me with a one-to-one meeting with the Prime Minister, as I would expect the First Minister to have. It was followed by a collective meeting between the First Ministers of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and the Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland with the Prime Minister in the real intergovernmental space which has always been there within the United Kingdom, although sadly neglected by the last Conservative government. And then there was the wider Council of the Nations and the Regions, where I thought it was important to be there to make sure that I could assert the Scottish interest and to make sure that I protected the Scottish interest. Now, from my perspective, I'm going to deal with the Prime Minister. I expect, as the elected leader of the government in Scotland, to have a direct relationship with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and he's confirmed to me that's his expectation as well and his way of working. So there'll obviously be officials, an envoy is an official, and they can engage with my officials, but from my part, as First Minister of Scotland, I'll be dealing directly with the Prime Minister.
So you would agree, I think, with the sentiment expressed by the late Salmond when he tweeted, I think, on yesterday or on Friday, that Scotland is a country, not a county, implying that the Scotland's First Minister, I beg your pardon, should not have the same status as, let's say, the Mayor of Manchester or the Mayor of West Yorkshire. So you would say, essentially, that council is really something for lower-level officials.
There's 2 points I'd make there. First thing is that Scotland is a country. Scotland's a nation, and we've got a proud history, a proud identity, and as First Minister of Scotland, I will always protect and assert the identity and the character and the powers and the responsibilities of Scotland as a distinctive country. I obviously want us to be an independent country, and that's what I'm focusing on in my leadership of the country. But the second thing is that where there's a body that's got executive influence, where the Prime Minister's engaging with a variety of political leaders, I want to make sure that I'm in there to protect the Scottish interest, to make sure I'm standing up for Scotland, because if I'm not standing up for Scotland, I'm not sure who is. And in that forum of the Council of the Nations and the Regions, it's vital that I'm there to protect Scotland.
OK, so you'll play a part there. Just very quickly, a party matter. You're 18 months off Holyrood elections. Your party last week invited would-be candidates to come forward next month. Do you want Nicola Sturgeon to be a candidate?
Well, it's obviously up to individuals to make their decision about whether or not they want to stand for election. Nicola's made a huge contribution to the electoral success of the Scottish National Party and in building us up to where we are today. And it's for Nicola to decide if she wishes to stand for election, and it will be up to the party to go through its processes of candidate selection to decide who should be the candidates.
And if she puts her name forward, you would welcome that?
Well, of course, that's entirely a choice for Nicola, and I would welcome it. She's made a huge contribution to Scottish politics, and I'm sure she's got more of a contribution to make in the future.
The next big event in UK politics is the budget on October the 30th. I read yesterday Scotland Office, on Scotland Office website that Scotland benefits from £2,417 extra public spending per person compared to the average across the United Kingdom. Are you going to expect Rachel Reeves to maintain your subsidy?
I'm going to expect Rachel Reeves, if she's interested in boosting growth in the economy, to end austerity. That's the most important thing that's got to happen in this budget. And the signs of that so far have been alarming, because one of the first actions of the new Labour government has been to cut the winter fuel payment to pensioners, and that feels an awful lot like the continuation of the austerity of the last government. So the most important thing that must happen in this budget is there must be an end to austerity, and there must be investment in the public services and the public infrastructure of the country, because growth will not come from a continuation of austerity. We've had 14 years of that. We've seen the colossal failure that it represents. And what the country now needs is investment in our public services and our public infrastructure. And that's what's got to come out of the budget.
And where would you be advising her to get the money to avoid austerity from? Taxing? Borrowing?
I think it's got to be a combination of both. I argued during the election campaign for a change to the fiscal rules, because I think if you accept the fiscal rules of the last Conservative government, then you're effectively signing up to austerity. So there has to be a change to the fiscal rules to acknowledge the importance of long-term investment in the economy. Secondly, I would make tax changes. We've taken tax changes in Scotland where we've asked those on higher incomes to pay slightly more in taxation. And that's given us £1.5 billion worth of investment in our public services that we wouldn't have had if we hadn't been prepared to make those tax changes. Now, if the UK government essentially mirrored the changes that we've made, they would have an increase in revenue at their disposal and the ability to invest in our public services.
John Swinney, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, back to our panel, Philip Collins, Guto Harry and Miranda Green. Phil, pretty unequivocal there. Spend, borrow, tax.
Yeah, well, they're going to do all three of those. So, yes, that's pretty unequivocal. In a sense, it's easier when you're not actually faced with the political consequences of making that decision, as Rachel Reeves will be. But, yeah, it is genuinely a difficult predicament that she faces, because she doesn't want to relinquish the thin but hard-earned reputation the Labour Party has for being different from the profligate Labour Party that they fear. And at the same time, she also doesn't want the detrimental consequences of the taxes. So I think overwhelmingly we're going to see the main burden of the change being a loosening of the fiscal rules. I think the investment story, the borrowing to invest, will be the biggest story if the government gets its way that comes out of tomorrow and then out of the budget.
Obviously, you were saying earlier on, Miranda, that actually, essentially, that what Phil's just said is right, that's what she's going to have to do. It's going to be pretty tricky for the so-called Iron Chancellor to pull this one off. What narrative can she possibly introduce now?
Well, quite, not least because if you win a landslide in the House of Commons on a one-word manifesto change, you've got to actually show that some of that is coming, right? So it can't be a kind of continuity fiscal responsibility administration. But, you know, you also, with the Truss mini-budget very much still in everyone's minds and higher mortgage rates, you don't want to be doing anything at all that freaks out the markets. So that makes it a sort of, you know, triple threat potentially, right? Because you could upset all the people you're taxing, upset the markets, you know, and also sort of scare off these potential business investors who we're hosting in the UK this week. I think it's very interesting what John Swinney said there, though, because, you know, obviously in Scotland, the big political battle is between the Labour Party and the SNP. And even in the general election campaign, it was really notable, wasn't it, that the SNP would always attack Labour rather than the Tory government, even before the election change. And for John Swinney, there are opportunities in Labour's missteps, but, you know, when the SNP's on the slide.
Yeah, I think the story that for the Labour Party will want that comes out of the investment summit will be investment. And that will be the atmosphere in which the budget then lands, they hope. So it may well be that the kind of things we're talking about when we get to the budget aren't quite what we're talking about today. Because if the investment summit lands well, if it seems to be successful, if it seems, as both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have thought for a long time, that Britain is in fact quite a really good investment proposition if the politics in America are difficult and European economy is not going well. This has been their belief for quite some time. If you get some of that coming out of tomorrow, then the question about the budget does alter a little bit.
One word it's interesting, I'm not hearing at all in all these conversations, is what business says is the biggest problem, productivity.
Yeah, and I think to be productive is very difficult when you add regulation and you add burdens and you raise taxes on businesses, and small businesses in particular, not just larger ones. I think they're both right. Over the period of this Parliament, there is the opportunity to see growth and also to do two things that I think some of the most interesting people in this new government are interested in. Wes Streeting is genuinely, I think, looking for ways of actually getting more bang for his buck, not just pouring more money into the NHS. And if using technology does bring down that bill, that would be very, very helpful, not just in terms of health, but in terms of the great financial picture. And likewise, 2.8 million people are apparently too sick to work in the UK now. 800,000 people more than before COVID. The state has bloated. If you address that, then you don't have to spend so much, and then you don't have to borrow so much, and you don't have to tax so much. Oh. And they need to do that over time. In the short term, of course, they are trapped. But that will be the true test. Whether over time, like your old boss would have done, he would have been looking, Tony Blair would have been looking for ways of actually spending.
I don't want to intrude too much into your mind, Guto, but you could have almost there been ventriloquising Kemi Badenoch. Regulation, is that where your vote is going?
This is not just Kemi Badenoch who believes this. Virtually every wealth creator in the UK who traditionally have sided more often than not with the Conservative Party that's been more conducive to wealth.
If only people you know had been in government for the last 14 years. I mean, goodness me, those people in government must have been hopeless, wasn't they?
If only we hadn't had a global pandemic. We've seen how chaos can happen without a global pandemic, without war in Europe, simply in 3 months.
Well, thank God for the government.
Not being able to turn down tickets for Taylor Swift and football.
Do you not think that, as Phil said, when you actually see how all these employment regulations end, it will be a compromise, right? And there's already a huge...
cynical.
No,
you're
it's
basically
not.
saying, don't worry your pretty little heads.
A consultation
because
with
they're
business.
just saying this to please the TUC, and it's never going to happen.
No, I think
that's far more duplicitous.
Nobody's saying
No,
that.
it isn't. It isn't.
I'm enjoying this. We're on the next.
Nobody's saying that.
A compromise is not
It's not gonna
duplicitous.
happen.
No, modern working practices, particularly because of digital companies, have led to a lot of exploitation. You have to address it. And it's quite right for a Labour government to come in and address it. But, for example, on the probation periods, they've ended up with a 9-month probation period, which is much longer than business was even hoping for. So I think, like Phil, that when you actually see what eventually emerges from this, it will not be that burdensome.
And if it's not going to happen, you've now shifted to enacting it on day one to it's never going to happen. Well, you've got nothing to worry about then, have you?
Other than a government that says one thing, does the opposite.
You're not looking reassured.
No, it's sort of, I don't know what to believe about this government.
All right, let's pay the bills. In just a moment, we'll take a look at the huge shock we saw in the Conservative Party leadership race this week with Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it, it got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients.
Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle. Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
If Labour is finding government hard going, how are the Conservatives doing in opposition? Well, they are still trying to find a new leader. This week, there was no little shock when former frontrunner and current Shadow Home Secretary James Cleverly was knocked out of the race by fellow MPs, possibly as a result of some miscalculation by his own supporters. It leaves Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch to face a vote by members. That'll be decided at the start of November. I'm joined now by the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride. Mel Stride, we'll come on to the leadership elections in a moment, but first of all, your reflections on Alex Salmond, who you must have known.
Yes, I knew Alex a little bit. A very congenial man, a man who was good to have a chat with and to be around, and of course a very consequential politician. I mean, I think in 2011 to have got that full majority at Holyrood, to have taken it on to the referendum in 2014. And whilst I fundamentally disagree what he stood for, nonetheless, they were very significant challenges. So a very big figure that has departed the stage yesterday. And my thoughts are with Moira, his friends and family.
Thank you. We'll come on to talk about the budget in a moment, but I just want to ask you about something that we learnt from, I think, the Business and Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, this morning. It sounded, from the interview I did with him, as though the Chancellor is at least actively considering, if not decided, to raise employers' national insurance. She hasn't got many options, has she?
Well, they boxed themselves in by going into the general election claiming they were not going to be a party that was going to have to put up taxes, and therefore saying that they would not put up all sorts of different taxes, broadly based taxes that account for about 75% of all the taxes raised. So that leaves you with a narrow field of taxes now to go for. I think if they go for employers' national insurance, firstly, it's a very bad tax to raise because it's a tax on jobs, and what they should be about is growth and increasing productivity in the economy. The second thing is I think it goes totally counter to their manifesto that assured us they would not be putting up national insurance. So unless they're to argue that employers' national insurance is not the same thing as national insurance, which is an absurdity to argue, then they're going to be breaching their manifesto commitment.
To be fair, they say that their pledge is about employees' national insurance. And you can make the case that they come out of the same pot, but technically speaking, they are separate. They are separate.
But in their
streams.
manifesto, which is the point that I'm making, they clearly say they will not raise national insurance. That is the expression they use. Now, unless they are to argue that employers' national insurance is somehow not national insurance, which would be an absurdity, then if they do this, they will be breaking a manifesto commitment.
Are you worried about capital gains tax, by the way?
Yes, I am. I think it's one of those taxes, actually, if you raise it too much, and it's applied, as we know, to assets like property and shares and so on, you can actually get less money, and I think that's what the Treasury is telling them, certainly if you get up to the later 30s or thereabouts in terms of the rise. And it's once again one of those taxes which will slow down economic growth. It's a tax on assets, it's a tax on wealth creation. And that's exactly the kind of thing that the government should not be doing. Now, can I make one other point, Trevor, which is, of course, the government has made it very hard for themselves because in their rush to give them cover to raise all these taxes, of course, they've concocted this fictitious black hole. They've talked doom and gloom. They've talked the economy down at a time when they should be talking it up. And what we're seeing now, indeed, is increases in, for example, at the 10-year gilt market end of things, rates beginning to
which will make governments borrowing harder, more expensive, rather.
But you don't help that by talking the economy down. And they're doing that for political reasons, but it's hurting real people up and down the country.
Okay, I've given you a free hit at them, but let's... people were talking this week about the likely Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride. Now, if the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride wouldn't be talking about raising taxes or more borrowing or whatever it is, what would the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride be recommending?
Well,
more cuts?
Well, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride is not in my gift. That's for others to consider. But look, what we've got to do is to get growth and productivity up in this economy. We've got to get back to the kind of trend growth and productivity we had back before the financial crisis. Now, part of the way we do that is welfare reform. So when I was Secretary of State at Work and Pensions, as we went into the general election, had found savings of about £12 billion. That was actually, when we talk about national insurance, going to help reduce employee national insurance. That's a pledge we had in our manifesto. We need fundamental supply-side reforms around house building, around infrastructure, around getting energy costs down, and we need to boost investment, both public and private, which is an issue of tax, amongst other measures. So if you can get the productivity going... If we had the same productivity, Trevor, very quickly, as France, Germany, the United States, our economy would be about 18% bigger than it is now. So the prize is enormous. We have a plan for that.
We'll have this discussion another time, but... for you to actually have any capacity to do any of this, you've got to have take the first step and get the right leader. You spotted James Cleverly last week. What went wrong?
In terms of the final outcome of that last round of the election, it's a secret ballot, so we will never know precisely what happens. But it does seem to me that, at the very least, a number of individual MPs decided that they would play games, that they would try and engineer the final two that they wanted to see, rather than focusing on the person that they actually wanted ultimately to be leader. And I think it does expose questions about whether that is the right electoral process for the party in the future. I think we respect this result because that was the system we had. But I think going forward, I think we do need to look at this, actually, because I think in many ways what has happened was unsatisfactory.
Meaning you would restrict the franchise to MPs, or you would open it wider?
So I think that I'm not referring there actually to the interplay between the members and their role and the MPs and their role. It's more about the MPs' electoral process. And I think there some people might say, well, it shouldn't be a secret ballot, so we know what everybody votes. Others might say, well, it shouldn't be a series of knockout rounds. It should be one round under a single transferable vote system. I'm not advocating any solution, but I am saying I think there's a conversation to be had.
All right. Well, look, you do realise this makes the Conservative Party look a bit like it couldn't organise its way out of a paper bag, but let's just ask...
Let's ask that question in a year's time when we've got our fantastic new leader. We've united the party and we're taking it to Labour and we're showing the country a bit.
OK, let me just ask you directly, who are you backing?
So I've not decided at this stage.
You haven't decided between them, or you're not just going to tell me, or you're just not going to?
Well, I may or may not go public when I do decide, but at the moment I'm still considering the two candidates. Yeah.
Mr. Jenrick says that anybody in the shadow cabinet is going to have to sign up to the withdrawal from the European Convention on Human Rights. If he wins and he asks you to join his team, will you sign this loyalty oath?
Well, look, these are hypotheticals, and we'll have to see what happens if and when we get to that particular point. But sitting here, it's not something I can take a decision on at the moment.
Oh, I'm taking that as Mr. Jenrick can't expect you to.
Well, I take it as you like, Trevor. There we are. You've had a straight answer to your straight question, anyway.
Well, that's right. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Next, I'll be joined by historian and author Simon Sebag Montefiore.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win.
Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.
This week we learned of the sad death of Lily Ebert. Lily was one of the last remaining survivors of Auschwitz and for decades spread a simple message about the Holocaust. Never again. She lived an extraordinary life, followed by millions on social media, and earlier this year welcomed a great-great-grandchild. I had the privilege of speaking to her for this programme in her final interview last January.
I believe, like normal people should, that you should be nice to each other and not hateful, but we learned it could happen, and I hope to God it will not happen again.
Lily and her grandson Dov spoke vividly in that interview about the dangers and challenges facing Jewish communities in the United Kingdom following the Hamas attacks last October. And with little sign of a resolution to the devastating conflict in Israel, Lebanon and Gaza, just how historic are the events that we're seeing both there and here at home? Well, the historian Simon Sebag Montefiore, author of a newly updated biography of the city of Jerusalem, joins me now. Morning, Simon.
Morning.
You come yourself from a distinguished Anglo-Jewish family. Do you recognise the danger that Lily Ebert was speaking of there?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think we really feel in the Jewish community here that we're in a new era now, and there has been a huge change. I think in historical terms, what we're seeing is the end of the taboo on anti-Semitism that was really one of the results of the 1945 war and the Holocaust. And, 50 or more years later, 80 years later, it's kind of run out. And we are just seeing many of the huge gains gained in society, not just the taboo on anti-Semitism, but many of the gains of the great liberal Reformation. All of those things are now being challenged. And many of the things we took for granted in our democracies, of which the taboo on anti-Semitism is a key one, are now being challenged and will have to be fought for again.
What do you see as the signs of the lifting of that taboo?
Just the tropes of anti-Semitism that we're seeing now. Of course, part of it is a protest against Israel. Part of it is a protest for Palestinian rights, which many of us agree with in their principles. But they are also using and exploiting tropes of anti-Semitism, some of them medieval, some of them 19th century, that we haven't seen for a long time. Well, for example, the blood libel, for example, the medieval blood libel that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children to make their matzah cakes for Passover, which started in medieval Britain, and which you're now seeing regularly in the posters on the rallies, the anti-Israel, pro-Palestine rallies that you see in London the whole time.
A lot of this has been emphasised, let's put it that way, since last October the 7th. Let's talk about that element before I want to come back to domestic anti-Semitism in a moment. From your reading of the history, let's think about Israel. Could Israel have made better or different choices about how it responded to what happened last year?
In terms of the conduct of the campaign, surely yes. In some ways, they could have made better choices. But did they have a choice not to react to Hamas and not to go into Gaza? I don't believe so. There are cases to be made that way too many civilians have been killed in the Gaza war, for example. But it seems to me essential that Hamas be defeated and that Hezbollah be defeated in Lebanon as well, but not at the cost of too many civilian casualties.
Well, indeed, I put it to the Israeli ambassador last week when she was here, that if the strategy was supposed to be targeting Hamas and Hezbollah militants, 40,000 dead in Gaza, another couple of thousand dead in Lebanon in the last week or two, looks like pretty poor targeting.
Well, the casualty figures are completely
I know, these are made
and
by
challenged.
Hamas. And
they're invented by Hamas and made by Hamas, and clearly we grieve for every single civilian.
Well, we're pretty certain that the numbers are in tens of thousands.
They are certainly in tens of thousands. There are also something like 18,000 Hamas soldiers have been killed as well, and that is included in that figure. But yes, I mean, there's a balance here. Israel needs to scatter these militia organizations that are devoted to its destruction and that are cat's paws for Iranian power. But at the same time, too much civilian loss, too many casualties, for example, in Lebanon, will prevent the Lebanese from recapturing control of their state, which we desperately need them to do, which Israel desperately needs them to do.
Well, the reason I ask these questions is that one doesn't have to be anti-Israel or take sides in this conflict to ask the question whether the way that Israel is pursuing this campaign of self-defense is in fact leading to its isolation and in the longer term to diminishing its security.
Well, that is undeniably true. You know, there has been a huge loss of support for Israel, and that is for many reasons. I mean, first of all, the civilian losses of Palestinians in Gaza, but secondly, a campaign by progressives of decolonization ideology that is really kind of subverting Western interests and the foreign policies of slightly nervous democracies like Britain, for example.
Well, indeed. Let's bring this home, as it were, because one of the things that I find most significant about this, it's not just about the Middle East, it's true about other areas of conflict as well, but spectacularly, something we used to think of, stuff that happens a long way away, not to do very much with us, is being played out on our streets and in our government's policy. So, for example, government decides to withdraw permits for export of some weapons, presumably partly because it wants to send a signal here. What's your view about this? To what extent is this creating an issue here between communities and for the Jewish community specifically?
I think in the bigger picture, the West is engaged in a battle of systems right now, worldwide, between the liberal democracies like us in America and an axis of dictatorships, the closed societies, the controlled societies of Russia, China, Iran, and so on, North Korea. And we need our allies to win these wars. Democracy needs to win wars in Ukraine and Israel. And so we need to back them. And there's a real danger that nervous democratic governments of short-term politicians allow the foreign policy of the West to be rocked and undermined by small groups of aggressive activists.
Would you level that at our own government?
I think there's a danger of that in our own government, and I think the Labour Party, with its massive majority, needs to be confident about the interests of the West. It doesn't mean that they should forswear humanitarian standards which should be applied to Israel as much as to anybody, and I would totally support that. But in the bigger picture, democracies need to win. The reason why democracy after 1945, after World War II, spread across the world was because of the victory of America and the Western Allies in 1945. And the Western governments are now following a policy of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and undermining our allies. And I think that, Ukraine, Israel are just 2 allies that need to win. We need to show that we can still win wars in the West.
Simon Zibag-Montefiore, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
By scanning the QR code you can see on your screen, you can listen to our new podcast. Sky News and NBC News bring you The World with Richard Engel and Yalda Hakim. Every week, they'll have more about the events in the Middle East and beyond. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours, and we're going to take it back.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. Now, freedom! There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes, torrential rain and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued with its ultimatum to the people of Ashkelon, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News. Back to our panel, Philip Collins, Guto Harry and Miranda Green. Guto, what did you make of Mel Stride? He didn't seem that thrilled by the choice.
No, it's very interesting, and I think, to be fair, and I respect him for reflecting what a lot of people feel, they feel slightly cheated of the opportunity to vote for somebody who's not of the right and who is a bit more mainstream, and I think there was an assumption towards the end, at least, that James Cleverly, who I think would have been an excellent guy to take over tomorrow and make the Conservative Party sort of vaguely likeable and worth listening to. And now it's a choice between somebody who may turn out to be brilliant and certainly a very interesting thing for a party of the right to pick the fourth woman when the party of the left has had two...
Oh, good. I was going to ask you which one of them has turned out to be interesting.
Or Robert Jenrick, who, you know, I wish him well, but at the moment I struggle to see how that would work. So it's a tough one.
I didn't think you'd gone into the diplomatic corps.
I wish him well.
But it was interesting how Mel Stride sort of reflected that, because, you know, already before the new leader is in place, a lot of people feel sort of cheated of the kind of leader they want.
OK, we could have quite a lot of fun with this, but let's talk about the people who are actually in charge. Everybody's going on about the 100 days, the FDR thing and so on. I mean, it's nonsense, but it's a good way to actually start the discussion. Let's have a look at Starmer's... public's feeling about Starmer. Compared to his predecessors, the only Prime Ministers who, after 100 days, were less popular than Keir Starmer were Liz Truss, who didn't actually get to 100 days, and actually Rishi Sunak. Phil, it's not good news.
Well, it is on the same level as Boris Johnson and above Gordon Brown, so I think it's doing
Not at 100 days. Boris Johnson was sort of 0, but he's...
Right.
The point is, he's in negative territory.
Yeah,
well,
he shot up after winning an election. So he started off his first 100 days.
I think to some extent, I mean, it's obviously not wonderful. To some extent, it reflects the difficulty of the inheritance. It has been a very difficult start. I think it's also an inexperienced government, which hasn't really found its feet yet. I think there are reasons for that. I don't think it's just to do with their competence. I think Starmer, as he often says himself, had to do in one term of government what it took Neil Kinnock and Tony Blair 13 years to do. It was Labour were coming from the worst defeat since 1935 that Starmer inherited. So to some extent, his political triumph in going from there to a very emphatic victory is really very significant. But that was a very short period. And one of the casualties of the truncated period as Leader of the Opposition is policy development was nowhere near as deep as it was for example, Blair.
I want to come to policy, but just quickly on this, Phil. I mean, I think you're making a good fist of it, but honestly, from a majority of whatever it is, 170 to this situation now, a leader 10% to... we haven't got a chart for it because it came out too late. Poll this morning, putting them level pegging with the Tories, who don't even have a leader.
Yeah, well, the Tories will definitely go down when they get a leader. I mean, they're in a sort of Belgian state where they should just carry on without one. I mean, 100 days. I mean, 28 of them were the weekend. I mean, it's only 72 days in. We need a bit of patience, don't we?
So I think the electorate didn't mind the fact that Keir Starmer's a bit of a kind of sober sides character. You know, doesn't really have the X factor, but at least you could say, well, he's proven his case because he was DPP, he ran an arm of government, a government agency, you know. But if you're a technocrat and then you turn out not to be very good at actually running things and as an administrator, then I think you've got a bit of a problem. So I think the kind of atmosphere of number 10 chaos and the slight headless chicken factor is damaging to him, because that's kind of what he was selling, was competence, as the contrast to all the kind of chaotic final years of the Tories. So I think that's a problem. I mean, obviously what really matters is where he looks at the end of your graph when we get to that time period, because if they recover from this, fine. But I don't think it has been a great start.
Before you go in, good, let's break it down a bit. Here is why people feel a bit cheesed off. And what I find interesting about this, it isn't actually the freebies, which is what you'd expected. It's the winter fuel decision. It's the early prisoner release. It's the actual policy decisions that they've made. Guto.
I was going to say, but you add to that playing Mr. Clean, and then you turn out not to be clean. I mean, I'm not sure 12%. I think there's something that's cut through the freebies. People are talking about it. They've clocked it. The winter fuel decision is a big one. It happens to be one that I think...
To be fair to them, I mean, you know, £30,000 worth of suits is not the same as £1 million worth of PPE or whatever it was.
We're not really personally associated with a benefit for the leader himself. OK, so it is different. It goes to the core of a guy who claimed to be whiter than white. Winter fuel decision, it is, as we were discussing earlier, the inevitable and, in that sense, the right thing to do. You've got to find some difficult decisions, and you've got to say, we've got to means test some of these things that we slosh about. Maybe the level they've put it, everybody's trying to shift that. But that is an example of a brave policy decision that was necessary.
Whoa, brave as in doesn't hurt me, I think.
Gitto's doing a brilliant job of defending the government here. I wouldn't myself have done that decision. I wouldn't have taken out the winter fuel from a bigger, wider set of measures and
So you and I deserve it? You and I need the winter fuel allowance, because none of this money is free.
You don't look a day over 30, Gitto. You're fine.
But do you think, Phil, that it is actually the policy, the decisions they've made that's cut through?
Yes, I do. And I think that actually there's a deeper problem than the one Miranda pointed to, which was the organisational problem. I think that underneath the organisational problem lies a much bigger question of, well, what do we do now that we are the government? What is our programme? I think that's the underlying fundamental problem. And the government is taking time to find the answer to that. But we don't. But there is no time in modern politics. It's accelerated and it's so fast. And I think that's the underlying problem.
Well, this is a very good point, because actually I'm very struck by this. Look around the cabinet table. There's, whatever it is, 22, 21 of them. Only 2 of them have been in cabinet before. It's 3 of them, sorry. And it's worth saying, by the way, that amongst Labour, the 400-and-something Labour MPs, only 37 of them have been MPs when Labour has been in government. This issue of experience, Miranda, do you think it matters?
Yeah, it probably does, but we've had, you know, more inexperienced prime ministers before now. I mean, Blair himself, right? So I don't think that's necessarily a kind of handicap. And actually, in fairness, I think, for example, Pat McFadden, even though he wasn't in the cabinet before, is an incredibly experienced political operator. So in all sort of justice, you should also have shaded him darker, I think, because of what he's done before.
So what's going wrong? They can barely seem to have breakfast without...
Totally.
Running into trouble.
So I agree with Phil. I think there wasn't enough of a sort of policy run-up before the election as to what do we do with our first 100 days and more. And when you contrast it with that pre-97 period, where there were so many brains exercised by not just what do we want to do, what's our destination, how do we articulate it, and how do we make sure that the mechanisms are the right one. So on this winter fuel payment, for example, it's a total straw man to say, of course, it should be means tested. I've yet to meet a sensible person who doesn't think it should be means tested, but how you do it is the difference between those sorts of unpopularity figures and bringing everyone together.
Guto has been 2 against 1 mostly this morning, so you've got 10 seconds to say what should they do.
What's my what?
10 seconds to say what should they be doing to recover.
Resign.
No. To be fair, we need them to succeed, and I think the talk and the focus on growth is right. And reform, I want to hear more of the West Streeting and the, social services.
That is it from us this week. I'll be back next Sunday. Watch Sophie every evening this week.
Of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America? People want their country to work.
Just want to jump in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
I say, bring it on.
With America divided and tensions running high, get ready for an election like no other.
Join our teams as we follow the campaign trail as America decides.
We will win, win, win. Get closer to the action this US election with full reaction and analysis.
Sky News, the full story first.